Hi everyone, welcome back to the VSO Gun Channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're doing a little bit of a recap from yesterday. Yesterday we did a live stream of the Cargill case. Yesterday was oral arguments at the Supreme Court, and that is the whole bump stock ban situation. If we are intellectually honest about that, I think that our side got the butts kicked. And really what I wanted to do is a couple pieces that recap sort of the happenings from that whole thing. I understand why somebody would not want to sit through 2 hours of that whole debacle. I was in severe pain the entire time. So I thought what I would do is give you a few snippets of important information that you need to know from it, and we will do that immediately following today's sponsors a lot. Today's video is brought to you by Mission First Tactical. Many of you out there will recognize this brand as a producer of accessories that you use on a regular basis. However, new for 2024, they have a line of drinkware items that are mocked up to look like certain things. Not only do some of them look like boomy things, but they also have accredited military gear. I have a full video on their acro packs that we covered late last year, and now this pack is available in Dirty Hippie Green. I'll have a discount code listed in the pinned comment down below and also over the affiliates page. So if you're interested in anything from Mission First Tactical, then you can use my code and get 20% off.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. The statutory definition of machine gun extends only to weapons that fire more than one shot automatically by a single function of the trigger. Mr. Cargill's non-mechanical bump stocks fall outside the statutory definition for two separate and independent reasons. First, a bump stock equipped rifle can fire only one shot per function of the trigger because the trigger must reset after every shot and must function again before another shot can be fired.
That was about half of the open for the Cargill side of the argument, our side of the argument, but then he goes into part two and it gets a little bit wordy and not very strong in my opinion, but then Clarence Thomas weighs in.
Behind the government's argument is a sense that this statute was initially enacted because of what some of the individuals did during Prohibition. And there was significant damage from machine guns, carnage, people dying, et cetera. And behind this is the notion that the bump stock does the exact same thing. So with that background, why shouldn't we look at a broader definition of function, one suggested by the government, as opposed to just the narrow function that you suggest?
So basically, hey, during Prohibition, there were a lot of gangsters doing illegal crap because it was lucrative to do that illicit crap because the government had a really dumb idea, which was to ban alcohol, and people were going to do it anyway. Sound familiar, right? What ended that was the end of Prohibition, not gun control. But in an attempt to do that, they instituted some machine gun regulations because they were trying to jam up gangsters when they caught them with tax fraud because they were having a really hard time getting them on really anything. Really, really stupid idea. The spirit of the law was that they wanted to target lots of bullets in a short amount of time. Why is it then that we are concerned with the individual functions instead of the end result?
I understood this to be a classification statute in the sense that Congress is trying to identify and classify certain weapons. So if you're right, I want to understand why that matters. Why does it matter for the purpose of this statute that we have backwards pressure in the ordinary case of a machine gun and forward pressure here? You're saying there's a distinction being drawn. Bump stocks don't fit into this category because of this distinction, and I guess I don't understand why Congress would have prohibited one and not the other. Why does it matter?
Well, it matters because the statute turns on whether the bump stock equipped rifle will fire more than one shot automatically by a single function of the trigger.
The statute is in context. The statute is classifying certain weapons for prohibition.
Right.
So for it to make sense, we have to understand why this category of weapons are ones that Congress wants to prohibit. And you're suggesting that Congress is prohibiting through this classification weapons in which we hold it backwards and automatic fire happens, but we push it forward and automatic fire happens, Congress says no.
There's no
That's
automatic fire. I'm sorry, Justice Jackson, there is no automatic fire.
Sorry, 800 bullet. The conversation with Justice Kagan suggested that through a bump stock, you can achieve the same kinds of result in terms of the amounts of bullets that are being ejected.
That
is that
true.
correct?
It has a very high rate of fire, but it's not automatic.
Right, but what I'm suggesting is that the category of prohibition is about the high rate of fire as opposed to, the movement of the trigger. And if you're right that it's about the movement of the trigger, I'm just asking why. Why would Congress want to prohibit certain things based on whether the trigger is moving as opposed to certain things that can achieve this lethal kind of spray of bullets?
Because the statute was written in 1934, about 100 years before we had bump stocks. So Congress drafted the statute at that time to capture the type of weaponry it wanted to prohibit in 1934.
The real answer, and to the whole system's credit, they get to this later on, but the focus at the time of the writing was to avoid the language of pull the trigger, because of course there are guns that you can push the trigger, right? And they still exist today. Instead, they focused on the mechanical function of the machine itself. When you pull the trigger, does it initiate a single round, or does it do a whole bunch until you let off? Defining a substantive difference between a machine that fires multiple rounds and one that you just shoot really fast.
Nothing in the bump stock changes the trigger. The trigger is still, in this situation, the curved metal lever, and the Solicitor General has never contested that point, neither has DOJ at any point in this litigation.
Mr. Mitchell, this conversation is totally confusing me because I thought that your argument depended on what the trigger, that the function of the trigger was what the trigger does mechanically inside the weapon. And therefore, whether you have one trigger or two triggers or three triggers or 10 buttons, it doesn't matter. What matters is what the trigger or the triggers do inside the gun.
Thank God for that, man, because what you missed in the space that I cut out was about 15 minutes of abject anarchy where words don't have meaning. And what he did was bring back into focus the concept that, hey, it doesn't matter how many different things you try to say that the statute means. The statute says, does the thing shoot one bullet or multiple? Regardless of how fast you shoot it, doesn't matter. It doesn't have a fire rate definition in the statute. What does the trigger actually do inside of the gun? And the last thing I wanted you to see is actually part of a negative that was being set up by Kagan, but she admits that it is that way.
What that means is that Congress had wanted to de-link the number of shots that were coming out of a barrel, right? More than one shot. Mm-hmm. It wanted to de-link that from a discrete human action.
As I mentioned, I recorded this whole thing yesterday. If you would like to listen to the full version, then I will have a link to it. You could, of course, find the recording on the Supreme Court's website, but if you listen to it here, then, you help the channel out. So if you intend to listen to it, then I'll have the links in all the relevant places. Thanks for tuning in. And I do a little bit of analysis at the end of that thing that kind of runs through kind of how we got our butt kicked. It may not even matter that our guy didn't do very well because the substantive questions on the table when it comes to this whole issue are pretty much set in stone. And if the justices interpret based on the precedent that has been set thus far, we might be all right. But you wouldn't be able to tell that by listening to this yesterday.